Welcome to Magic Arcanum. I'm Ryan Gomez. Behind the scenes is Nicole Letson, and we are so glad you're here because it's story time. People ask me all the time, "Hey Ryan Gomez, how can I build a better Magic deck?" So I thought, since this is my birthday month, I would give you all the gift of how to do that. But first, let me say a quick thank you to everyone who helps make this show possible through their support on Patreon. It's a great way to get your name in the credits and unlock some extra goodies like the ability to vote on future episodes. So check it out using the link down below. Okay, so what goes into making the best Magic deck possible? Let's start with some basics. Every deck exists somewhere on a line that goes from aggressive to control. I can already tell some people are going to head right to the comments to tell me I'm wrong because there's also combo and tempo and all this other stuff. But wait just a minute. Aggressive or aggro and control. I'm saying on a very fundamental level, every deck exists somewhere between these two outer markers. Your job as a player is to figure out where your deck fits. And the best way to do that is to compare threats versus answers. Ryan, why can't you just tell me how many lands and creatures I need to put in my deck? Why do you gotta make this hard with all these vocabulary words, huh? Patience, my little lore mages, patience. A threat is any card that can win you the game, and an aggressive deck is usually filled with threats, the most common of which would be creatures that can attack. An answer, meanwhile, is going to be any card that stops a threat, and a control deck is usually full of answers. They can be kill spells that destroy creatures or counter spells that stop them from ever reaching the battlefield. In other words, a control deck tries to control the game by removing the threats played by the more aggressive deck, and the aggressive deck tries to win before all of their threats have been controlled by the control deck. But what happens when two control decks face off or two aggressive decks? Well, thanks to the randomness of the draw, even if the two decks are identical, one of them will still end up being slightly more controlling and one will be slightly more aggressive. Your job as player is to figure out which side of the line your deck is on as fast as possible. The better you can do that, the more likely it is you're going to win the game. Let's do a quick evaluation test. This is Siege Rhino. Now, other channels have done entire videos on this guy, but for our purposes today, let's just focus on what role he would play in a deck. If you said threat, you're right. Draining 3 life from our opponent could win the game on the spot, and the ability to attack every turn with 4 power and trample will also end the game in quick fashion. So, can you make a deck that is just 30 lands and 30 Siege Rhinos? No, and even if you could, it wouldn't be a very good aggressive deck, and that's thanks to another vocabulary term, the mana curve. Every spell in your deck has a cost. If you've played Magic even once, you know that, right? Part of your job as deck builder is to find the best cards to play, but also to balance them across this curve. Siege Rhino works great at the top end of a curve. He does well when he has aggressive friends to hit the battlefield first. Warden of the First Tree, Den Protector, Anafenza of the Foremost, these guys made up an aggressive curve that rolled out the carpet for Siege Rhino during his day in Standard. Switching back to the other side for a moment, how about Banishing Light? It won't win you the game by itself, but it will remove just about any threat your opponent can play, which makes this a very versatile answer card. The curve for a control deck looks a little different from an average aggressive deck, and that's because control decks want to answer threats as cheaply as they can, and then use the mana that they saved to draw more cards, giving them, in effect, more answers. Now, ultimately, a control deck does need a way to win the game. And I hope you don't get queasy during time travel, because we are about to take a look at some very old decks to see how things have evolved. In the beginning of Magic, players just kind of smushed all their cards together into one big pile and then played all night and all day. Then a couple of people decided they wanted to win a little faster and a little more consistently, so things started to get interesting in a hurry. Now, your history book might have different names in here, but this is my show, so I'm telling it the way I heard it growing up on the mean streets of Rochester, New York, so keep all that in mind. Paul Sly shows up for PTQ Atlanta in 1996 with a very aggressive deck. It's almost entirely threats picked to maximize their effectiveness at every point on the mana curve. The swarm of small creatures would overwhelm an opponent, and a handful of lightning bolts and incinerates would deal the last few points of damage necessary to win the game. And win he did. Paul took his deck all the way to second place of the PTQ and firmly established a magic bloodline that still has children to this day. Don't believe me? Check out the deck Seth Manfield brought to the World Championship back in February. The deck plays powerful threats at every point along the curve, topping out with Embercleave equipped to Anax. Anax, by the way, fantastic threat because even if your opponent answers it once, it will leave behind another threat and often force them to spend a second card on it. So aggressive decks today still follow the same plan they did over 20 years ago. Play the best threats available for your curve. Manfield's deck has some extra synergy to it that Sly could only dream of, though. You've got the constantly growing Runaway Steamkin. You've got the card-drawing Robber of the Rich. Even if you draw a second Anax, that's not bad because that one just makes 4 Satyr tokens, which then reduce the cost of your Embercleave. Sorry, it's just that there are few things that can stop a well-tuned aggressive deck. One of them happens to be an even better tuned control deck, the most famous of which started hitting tables in 1995. A player by the name of Brian Weissman is credited with creating what was simply called the deck. It was almost entirely answer cards, with the only threats being a pair of Serra Angels. The idea was to pick off your opponent's threats with Swords to Plowshares, or stop them from attacking you by hiding behind a moat. Disrupting Scepter would empty their hand, and Ancestral Recall would refill your own. Once your opponent had nothing on board and nothing in hand, you could deploy one of your Serra Angels while keeping a counterspell ready for whatever they happen to draw next. And once again, we are looking at a deck that has been a cornerstone of Magic for over 2 decades. Check it out. This is the winning World Championship deck list as played by Paulo Vitor Damo da Rosa. Notice anything? The counterspells became Dovin's Veto, and the Serra Angels got a big upgrade with Dream Trawler and Archon of Sun's Grace. But this is the spiritual descendant of the deck Weissman played all those years ago. So what does this teach us? There's nothing new under the sun? No. These 2 decks, both today and in the early days of Magic, merely establish the boundaries of the playing field, and all of this space is your sandbox. Somewhere in here, you can make a mid-range deck which tries to have enough answers to stop an aggressive deck and bring more threats than a control deck can handle. Mid-range decks are popular, especially at the lower levels of competitive play, because they're flexible, and they often use cards that are cheaper than the ones you'll find in the more focused builds at either end of the spectrum. We mentioned tempo and control earlier, so let me touch on those real quick. To me, a tempo deck is still a control deck because you are attempting to control the pace at which the game unfolds, and most of your cards are answers, not threats. Likewise, a combo deck, by my definition, is an aggressive deck. You typically have one major threat that will win the game if not answered, and the rest of your cards kind of aggressively dig to find those pieces. My advice for new players or anyone looking to build their own deck is to study the examples of the aggressive and controlled decks, and then probably make your own aggressive deck. Avoid being stuck in the mid-range if you can. A true aggressive deck is typically better for a less experienced player because your games go faster, and the longer a game goes, the more likely it is you will make a mistake that a more experienced opponent will be able to capitalize on. So don't even give them that window. Hit hard and fast and learn as you go. You'll be able to play more games faster with an aggressive deck, so your own skills will level up quicker and make you a better player. If you need some inspiration to get yourself started, check out the description. I'll put some links down there to a couple of my favorite decks right now, including a few budget ones that should help you earn some gold on Arena. And if you want even more tips to help make your deck better, stick with me for Mustache Minute. Ready? Here we go. So one trap I see a lot of new players make goes kind of like this. Hey, I just made this really aggressive goblin deck, and then in case the game goes long, I put some Shivan Dragons in there. Let me tell you, there is no better way to make sure the game does go long than to put some Shivan Dragons into your nice aggressive goblin deck. While we're at it, don't play two bad cards that together are somehow good. Just don't do that. Do start with 4 copies of your best card, and if you don't have 4 copies, trade for them or buy them from, well, I don't have a sponsor yet, but if I did, this is where I would tell you to go buy cards from them. Do not count on life gain as a strategy. Not losing the game is not the same as winning the game. Now, if you have a payoff in there, like a Johnny's Pride Mate, okay, you can make a deck around that, but do not just put life gain cards in your deck solely to make yourself more healthy than your opponent. Try starting off with 24 lands and 36 spells. And those 36 spells should be 4 copies of your 9 best cards. Play like 100 games before you change anything. Even if you're going to change the lands, only change 1 at a time, okay? Go slow. Tribal stuff is a lot of fun, but using only zombies just so you can say you made a zombie deck probably isn't going to be as good as if you included some other cards in there to help it be more aggressive or more controlling, depending on which way you're going. Having said that, I will also include a link to my new pet project, zombie tribal deck for Theros Standard. And here's probably the best tip of all. Do not be afraid to have the same deck as somebody else has online. The term net decker gets thrown around like an insult around here sometimes, but honestly, if you're new to the game, it is one of the best ways to learn and improve. At the same time though, do not also be afraid to have a deck that looks nothing like the ones you see online. Being able to experiment and put your own personality and spin on your pile of cards is what makes this game so great. That's why it has been around for over 25 years. Okay, so this Mustache Minute ended up being more inspirational than funny, but it's my birthday, so I get to do what I want. What is your best tip for deck building? Let us know down in the comments, and then make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the great stories you'll only find here on Magic Arcana. We'll see you.